My brother destroyed my life's work with a single keystroke. And my parents smiled and watched as my dreams turned to ash in my mouth. They called it protecting the family. They called it a necessary lesson. But they didn't know that in their quest to erase me, they'd left a digital footprint, and I was about to follow it all the way back and burn their world to the ground. It wasn't the kind of explosion you see in movies, with fire and screaming. It was quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a bomb has already gone off, when all you can hear is the ringing in your own ears and the sound of everything you ever loved turning into dust. The moment it happened, the air in the room was thick with the smell of caramelized sugar, toasted almonds, and hope. My hope. It had a physical presence, something I felt I could reach out and touch. The venue was a small rented gallery space downtown, all white walls and polished concrete floors, a blank canvas for my future. I had spent 2 years of my life, every spare moment, every ounce of creative energy, perfecting this. My brand, The Alchemist's Oven, was more than a business. It was the articulation of my soul in flour and butter. My signature creation, the chrono croissant, a laminated pastry with a liquid spiced honey core that was supposed to taste like a memory, was arranged on minimalist white platters. Each one was a tiny edible sculpture. My hands, usually dusted with flour, were clean. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back, wanting nothing to distract from the food. Across the room, my parents, Richard and Eleanor, were playing their parts perfectly. My father, a man whose approval I'd chased my entire life, looked almost proud, shaking hands with the handful of local food bloggers I'd managed to invite. My mother was a portrait of poised support, her smile as carefully constructed as the architectural bob of her hair. And then there was Liam, my older brother. He stood beside them, a smirk playing on his lips that he probably thought looked encouraging. I knew better. It was the smirk of a king watching a court jester perform. Amusing but ultimately insignificant. The guest of honor was a man named Arthur Harrison. He wasn't just an investor. He was the investor. A culinary kingmaker in our city, known for spotting niche talent and turning small-batch artisans into household names. Getting him here had been a coup, a miracle I'd orchestrated through sheer, relentless persistence. He was a stern-looking man in his late 50s, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He picked up a chrono croissant, inspecting its delicate layers, the dusting of powdered gold I'd added for a touch of theater. The entire room went silent. This was it. The moment that would divide my life into a before and an after. He took a bite. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched his face, waiting for that flicker of surprise, of delight. I knew what it was supposed to taste like. A warm wave of cinnamon and cardamom, followed by the bright, citrusy burst of the honey core, and then the buttery, flaky finish that lingered on the palate. I had tested it 100 times. It was perfect, but the look on his face wasn't delight. It was confusion, quickly morphing into disgust. He chewed once, twice, then his jaw locked. He subtly reached for a napkin and, with practiced discretion, spit out the mouthful of my dream. He cleared his throat, his eyes finding mine across the room. There was no anger in them, just a cold, dismissive pity that was 1,000 times worse. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the hushed space. "What is this?" My throat closed up. It's a spiced honey and almond croissant," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and childish. He shook his head, a small final gesture of negation. "No," he said, setting the mangled pastry back on the platter as if it were contaminated. "This is salt. It tastes like a salt lick. It's completely inedible." A wave of nausea washed over me. Salt? No. Impossible. I had measured every gram myself. I watched, horrified, as another blogger who had just taken a bite gagged slightly, her face paling. The dream wasn't just dying. It was being poisoned in front of a live audience. I looked at my parents for support, for some sign of shared confusion. But I found none. My mother's smile had faltered, replaced by a look of strained, rehearsed sympathy. My father was already turning away, starting a conversation with someone else, creating distance. And Liam was looking right at me. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of deep, theatrical concern. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture that said, "Oh, Chloe, you tried so hard. You flew too close to the sun." And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a murder. And the killer was standing right in front of me, offering a comforting hand to the victim's family. My family. The taste in my mouth wasn't honey or salt. It was the bitter metallic tang of betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked out of the gallery, the sound of my own footsteps on the concrete floor echoing the utter emptiness that had just opened up inside of me. The alchemist's oven was closed before it ever opened. The silence in our house for the next few days was a living thing. It was a thick, suffocating blanket my parents used to smother any potential confrontation. They moved around me with a delicate, heartbreaking gentleness, as if I were a grieving widow. My mother would leave trays of food outside my bedroom door. Ironically, food from their restaurant, the Sterling Plate. Food that tasted like duty and disappointment. My father would knock softly and ask if I needed anything, the question hanging in the air, unanswered, because the one thing I needed was the truth. And that was the one thing he would never give me. They spoke in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear, their words weaving a narrative of my failure. She was just too ambitious. She didn't have the experience. This culinary world is brutal. Maybe it's for the best. They were building a story to protect themselves from the reality of what had happened. A story where I was a tragic protagonist who simply wasn't good enough. It was easier than admitting they had raised a saboteur. Liam was the worst. He would come to my door, his voice dripping with false empathy. "Chloe, talk to me. We can figure this out. Maybe you just had an off day. It happens to the best of us." He was playing the role of the supportive older brother so convincingly that for a terrifying second, I would almost doubt my own sanity. But then I'd see the flicker in his eyes, the satisfaction he couldn't quite hide, and the cold certainty would return. My family's world revolved around the Sterling Plate. It was a respected, old-school institution, known for its traditional American fare and its unchanging menu. It was my father's legacy, his father's before him. It was also struggling. Tastes had changed, and the Sterling Plate had refused to change with them. Liam, who had a business degree and zero culinary talent, had been designated the heir apparent, since birth. His vision for the restaurant involved adding truffle fries to the menu and updating the font on the signage. These revolutionary ideas were discussed at the dinner table with the gravity of corporate merger negotiations. My passion for baking, on the other hand, was treated as a cute hobby, a charming little pastime that was acceptable as long as it didn't interfere with the real world, the world of the family business. When I first proposed my idea for the alchemist's oven, my father had patted my hand and said, "That's nice, sweetie, but you need a real career." My mother worried about the risk. They didn't see the artistry, the chemistry, the years of obsessive practice. They saw a girl playing with flour, a distraction from her proper role, which was, implicitly, to support Liam's ascension. My success would have been my own. It would have been separate from them, from the sterling plate, from the suffocating weight of their expectations. And that, I realized, was the threat. My victory would have highlighted Liam's mediocrity. My independence would have been a crack in the foundation of the family narrative they had so carefully constructed. So, they let him tear it down. No, they didn't just let him. They held the ladder. I spent 2 days locked in my room, the shame and horror washing over me in waves. My cat, Jasper, a sleek black shadow I'd rescued a year ago, seemed to be the only one who understood. He didn't try to comfort me. He just sat on the edge of my bed, a silent, watchful presence, his yellow eyes tracking my every move. He'd been found in a dumpster, behind a bakery, and I always felt we had a shared understanding of being discarded. On the 3rd day, the grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear rage. It was a clarifying anger that burned away the confusion. I didn't make a mistake. I replayed the entire process in my head, the meticulous mise en place, the weighing of every ingredient to the 10th of a gram. The salt container was on a completely different shelf from the sugar, in a different shaped jar. A mix-up of that magnitude wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. This was deliberate. It was sabotage. And there was only one person who had the motive, the opportunity, and the cruelty to do it. Liam. He'd been helping me pack the van that morning. He'd been alone with the finished pastries for at least 10 minutes while I took a last-minute phone call. But how? He couldn't have injected every single croissant with salt water. It had to be in the recipe itself. But my recipe book, a worn, leather-bound journal, was locked in my desk. Then my mind snagged on a detail. The night before the launch, I'd been finalizing the production schedule on the family iPad. We all used it. It was the central hub for calendars, shopping lists, and notes. I kept a digital version of all my recipes in a notes app on that iPad, synced to the cloud. It was my backup, my modern grimoire. I'd been looking at the chrono croissant recipe, double-checking the oven temperatures. Liam had come into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He'd looked over my shoulder. "Still tinkering with the magic formula?" he'd asked, his voice casual. Too casual. My heart started to pound. A slow, heavy drumbeat of dawning realization. The app. The digital recipe. It wouldn't take a master hacker. All it would take was 5 seconds, a swipe of a finger, a change of a single number. Swapping the value for sugar with the value for salt. Devious. Simple. Utterly untraceable. Or so he thought. I got out of bed, my movements stiff. I walked to the hallway where the iPad was charging on its stand. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I unlocked the screen. My reflection, a pale, determined ghost on the glass. I opened the Notes app. There it was, my recipe. I scrolled down to the ingredients for the dough. Sugar, 50 grams. Fine sea salt, 600 grams. A 600-gram mountain of salt. My blood ran cold. He'd swapped them. He'd just flipped the numbers. But I needed more than just seeing the corrupted recipe. I needed proof that he did it. I felt a surge of despair. How could I ever prove it? It was my word against the Golden Boys, and my word, in this family, was worth nothing. Then, a memory surfaced. A tiny flicker of hope. The app I used wasn't just a simple notepad. It was a more robust project management tool I'd started using for its collaboration features, and I remembered reading about a specific feature when I installed it. A feature I'd never used. Version history. It automatically logged every single change made to a document, time-stamped, and sometimes, if the device settings were right, it logged the user account that made the change. My breath hitched. I navigated through the menus, my fingers fumbling. Settings. Document info. Version history. A list appeared. A log of every revision, every tweak I had ever made. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the dates. And then, I saw it. Revisión. February 7, 2014, the night before the launch. My heart was in my throat. I tapped on it. The screen refreshed, showing the document as it existed at that exact moment. And there, highlighted in green, were the changes. The number 600, next to the word sugar, was crossed out, and 50 was written beside it. The number 50, next to fine sea salt, was crossed out, and 600 was written beside it. A direct, unequivocal swap. At the top of the screen, in small gray letters, was the information that made the world stop. Change made by user account, Liam Sterling. He hadn't even bothered to log out of his own profile on the shared device. It was the arrogance, the absolute, unshakable belief that he was so untouchable, so protected, that he didn't even need to cover his tracks. He assumed I was too stupid, too emotional, too defeated to ever look. He had signed his confession. I took a screenshot. Then another. I emailed them to a new secret email address I created on the spot. I backed them up to a new cloud account. I saved the evidence in 6 different places. The rage was gone now, replaced by an arctic calm. This wasn't just about a ruined recipe anymore. This was about my life. They had tried to bury me. They didn't realize they had just planted a seed. This wasn't the first time Liam had lit a fire, and I was the one who got burned. It was a pattern woven into the fabric of our family, a tapestry of his transgressions and my punishments. When he was 17, he took our father's vintage Mustang, the car my dad polished every Sunday and never let anyone else drive, for a joyride. He crashed it into a neighbor's fence, not badly, but enough to crumple a fender and shatter a headlight. He came home, panicked, and told our parents that I had begged him to let me drive, that I'd lost control, and that he'd heroically grabbed the wheel at the last second to prevent something worse. I was 14. I didn't even have a learner's permit. I remember standing in the living room, the smell of my father's fury filling the air, a scent of bitter coffee and disappointment. "Is this true, Chloe?" he'd asked, his eyes already convicting me. I denied it, of course, my voice trembling. I told him Liam was lying. Liam, a master of performative remorse, had tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he'd said, looking at the floor. "I shouldn't have given in. I should have been the responsible one." It was his word against mine, and in the court of our family, Liam had permanent tenure as the reliable narrator. I was grounded for the entire summer. My father didn't speak to me for a month, his silence a constant, grinding accusation. Liam got a pat on the back for his honesty in admitting his minor lapse in judgment. They paid for the repairs and told me I was lucky it wasn't worse, that I should think about the consequences of my recklessness. I learned a valuable lesson that day, but it wasn't about recklessness. It was about power. The truth didn't matter. The accepted narrative was everything. The only person who ever saw through the facade was my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. Carol was the family's original black sheep. She was an artist, a painter who had left our small conservative town for the city the moment she turned 18. She was loud and funny and wore colors that clashed beautifully. My parents spoke of her in hushed, pitying tones. "Poor Carol," my mother would sigh. "So much talent, but no direction." What they meant was that she hadn't married a sensible man, bought a sensible house, and produced sensible children. She had chosen a life that was her own, and for that, she was an outcast. She would visit, once a year, a whirlwind of chaotic energy and genuine affection. She was the only one who looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something other than a quieter, less impressive version of my brother. She was the one who bought me my first set of professional-grade pastry tips, who tasted my first clumsy attempts at a macaron and declared it a work of genius in progress. After the Mustang incident, she called me. I don't know how she knew, but she always did. "He's lying, isn't he?" she said. No preamble. I burst into tears. The relief of being believed so overwhelming, it broke me. "They'll protect him, sweet girl," she'd said, her voice sad but firm. "It's what they do. Don't you ever let them make you believe his story is the truth. You hold on to your truth. Hold on to it like it's the only thing you own." Our phone calls became my lifeline, a secret tether to a reality where I was seen and valued. It was on her advice that I got Jasper. My mother had protested. A cat? In this house? The shedding, the smell? But I stood my ground for the first time in my life. I paid the adoption fee with my own savings, and Jasper became my quiet co-conspirator, my furry confidant in a house that felt increasingly alien. He was a piece of a world that was mine, a world separate from their expectations. Holding the iPad with the digital proof of Liam's sabotage, I thought of Aunt Carol's words. "Hold on to your truth." I had the truth now, not just in my gut, but in pixels and timestamps. The question was what to do with it. The old Chloe, the one who existed before the disastrous tasting event, would have confronted them. She would have stormed into the living room, brandishing the iPad, her voice shaking with righteous anger. And they would have dismantled her. Liam would have claimed it was a prank that went too far. My parents would have accused me of escalating the situation, of trying to tear the family apart over a silly baking project. They would have gaslit me until I apologized for being the one who got hurt. But I wasn't the old Chloe anymore. She had died on that polished concrete floor. The new Chloe was cold and methodical. She understood that a direct confrontation was a battle on their home turf. a game they had perfected over decades. To win, I had to change the venue. I had to move the fight to neutral ground, with a referee who wasn't on their payroll. I closed the app, wiped the iPad clean of my fingerprints, and placed it back on its charging stand. I went back to my room, Jasper purring at my feet, and I made a phone call. Not to my parents, not to Liam. I called the one person in the world I knew would believe me, without a shred of proof, because she had been watching this play unfold her entire life. "Aunt Carol," I said when she answered, "I need your help. Liam finally did it. He burned it all down." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then her voice, low and steady. "Good. Now we can build something new from the ashes. Send me everything you have." The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. It was staged not as a confrontation, but as a family business resolution. Aunt Carol, leveraging a small forgotten block of shares she still held in the restaurant's parent company, had insisted on a formal sit-down with the family's longtime business lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies. The stated purpose was to discuss the dissolution of Chloe's failed solo venture, and to formally approve Liam's new strategic direction for the Sterling Plate. Liam was ecstatic. He saw it as his coronation. My parents saw it as a necessary, if unpleasant, bit of administrative tidying up. They thought they were coming to finalize my defeat. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. We met in Mr. Davies's boardroom, a space of dark wood, leather chairs, and the hushed, expensive silence of corporate law. I arrived with Aunt Carol. She had driven in from the city, dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit that made her look like a beautiful, exotic bird of prey. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to present evidence. My parents and Liam arrived a few minutes later. My mother gave Carol a tight, disapproving smile. My father nodded curtly. Liam swaggered in, carrying a leather-bound portfolio containing his vision, which I was sure was full of glossy pictures of truffle fries. Mr. Davies, a portly man with a perpetually worried expression, cleared his throat and began. "Right. So, we're here to discuss the path forward. Richard, Eleanor, you've expressed that while Chloe's endeavor was admirable, it's time to refocus all assets and energy on the core brand. Liam, I have your proposal here." Liam leaned forward, his face alight with smug ambition. "That's right, Mr. Davies. With all due respect to Chloe's efforts, the market has spoken. The Sterling Plate needs stable, proven leadership. My plan focuses on modernizing our brand identity, optimizing our supply chain, and introducing a new gastropub-inspired appetizer menu to attract a younger demographic." He was spouting MBA jargon, like a fire hose. My parents beamed. This was their son, their sensible, business-minded, proven leader. "We think it's for the best," my mother added, her gaze flicking to me with a hint of pity. "Chloe needs to understand that passion isn't enough. Business is business." I remained silent, letting them build their case, letting them dig the hole a little deeper. Aunt Carol sat beside me, one perfectly manicured nail tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the polished mahogany table. Finally, when Liam had finished his pompous presentation, Mr. Davies turned to me. "Chloe, do you have anything to add before we move to sign off on the reallocation of funds?" This was my cue. I didn't speak. I simply took out my phone, connected it to the large monitor on the wall, and pushed the evidence to the screen. The screenshot of the corrupted recipe appeared, massive and undeniable. Sugar, 50. Fine sea salt, 600. A confused silence fell over the room. "What is this?" my father demanded, squinting at the screen. "That," I said, my voice steady and clear, "is the recipe for my chrono croissant as it existed on the morning of my launch." Liam laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Okay. So you made a typo. It happens. A big one, apparently." "That's what I thought at first," I said. My eyes locked on his. But typos don't usually have a digital signature. I swiped to the next image. The screenshot of the version history. Revision, February 17th, 2:14 a.m. Change made by user account. Liam Sterling. The air left the room. My mother's face went slack, the color draining from her cheeks. My father stared, his mouth slightly agape, the confident bluster vanishing in an instant. Liam looked like he'd been shot. His face went from pale to a blotchy red. That's fake," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. "She faked that. She's trying to blame me for her own failure." "Is it fake, Liam?" Aunt Carol asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Because digital forensics experts can verify the metadata from the original device in about an hour. That is, unless someone has wiped the family iPad in the last few days. Have you, Eleanor?" My mother flinched as if struck. The lie died on Liam's lips. The truth was there, stark and irrefutable, glowing on the wall. The silence stretched, thick and damning. It was my father who broke it, his voice a low, desperate rumble. "Why?" he asked, not looking at me, but at Liam. "Why would you do this?" "Because she was going to make us all look like fools," Liam burst out, his composure finally shattering. "Her and her stupid fancy pastries. While we're struggling to keep Grandpa's restaurant afloat, she's off playing in her fantasy bakery. I just wanted to bring her back down to earth, to make her see that the family business is what matters. You said it yourselves. You said you wished she would just focus on what's important." He pointed a shaking finger at our parents. "You wanted this. You wanted her to fail." My mother gasped. "We never said that." "Not in words," Liam shot back. "But you did. Every time you dismissed her, every time you told her it was just a hobby. You were relieved when it went bad. I saw your faces, and there it was. The whole rotten, toxic truth laid bare on the boardroom table. They hadn't just enabled a saboteur. They had created one. They had fed his resentment, his entitlement, his belief that his success was so paramount that my destruction was an acceptable form of collateral damage. Mr. Davies, who had been watching this implosion with a look of pure horror, finally spoke. "Richard, Eleanor," he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier warmth. "Is this true? Did you have any knowledge of this?" My father couldn't speak. He just stared at his son, his golden boy, who had just implicated him in a conspiracy. My mother, however, rallied, her maternal instinct for protection overriding everything else. "Of course not," she said, her voice high and brittle. "We are just as shocked as you are. This is a terrible, isolated incident. A sibling rivalry that went too far." I finally looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast, empty distance. "It wasn't a rivalry," I said quietly. "A rivalry implies two people are competing. This was an execution, and you were both willing spectators." Aunt Carol stood up, gathering her purse. "I believe we're done here, Mr. Davies," she said. "We will not be dissolving my niece's company. In fact, I will be personally funding its relaunch. Furthermore, we will be exploring all legal options regarding Liam's deliberate sabotage and fraudulent misrepresentation. And as for my shares in Sterling Plate, LLC, I'll be selling them. I don't invest in businesses run by criminals and liars." She walked to the door, paused, and looked back at my parents. "You know, for years you've pitied me for the life I chose. But I sleep soundly at night. Can you say the same?" And with that, she swept out of the room, leaving my family sitting in the ruins of their own making. I followed her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. The fallout was swift and catastrophic, but not in the way I expected. There were no dramatic lawsuits, no public shaming. It was a quieter, more insidious collapse. Aunt Carol was true to her word. Her lawyer sent a letter to Mr. Davies, formally initiating the process of divesting her shares and outlining a potential civil case against Liam for tortious interference. The threat was enough. Mr. Harrison, the investor from my disastrous launch, got wind of the story through the city's tight-knit food community. He called me, personally, not to invest, but to apologize for his initial judgment and to commend my courage. He also made it very clear that he, and anyone in his network, would never, under any circumstances, do business with the Sterling Plate or any member of the Sterling family again. He had been sold a lie, and in his world, integrity was the only currency that mattered. The Sterling Plate didn't close overnight. It bled out slowly. Reservations dwindled. Staff, sensing the rot at the core, began to leave for more stable kitchens. The younger demographic Liam was so keen to attract never materialized. My parents, stripped of their community standing and their self-righteous narrative, turned on each other. The united front they had presented to the world their entire lives crumbled under the weight of their shared guilt and resentment. My father blamed my mother for coddling Liam. My mother blamed my father for putting so much pressure on him to be a success. Their hushed arguments became the new soundtrack of the house, a funeral dirge for a family that had died long before the last customer walked out the door. Liam disappeared. After the boardroom confrontation, he packed a bag and left. No note, no explanation. A few weeks later, my mother got a short, bitter text from him, from a city 1,000 miles away, blaming me for ruining his life. I felt a strange sense of pity for him. He was a hollow man, built on a foundation of lies and unearned praise. When the foundation was removed, there was nothing left. I moved in with Aunt Carol. Her apartment in the city was a chaotic riot of color, canvases leaning against every wall, the air smelling of turpentine and possibility. It was the safest place I had ever been. We didn't talk about my family much. We didn't need to. Instead, we talked about the future. We talked about recipes and business models and the chemistry of emulsions. She saw the alchemist in me, not the failed baker. They tried to define you by their own limitations, she told me one evening, as we sat on her balcony overlooking the city lights. The greatest revenge isn't watching them fail, Chloe. It's defining yourself so completely on your own terms that their opinion becomes utterly irrelevant. And that became my mantra. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I was reclaiming my passion, my name, my future. The pain of the betrayal didn't vanish. It lingered, a phantom limb that ached on rainy days. There were nights I would wake up with the ghost of that humiliation fresh in my mind. The investor's look of disgust, my parents' empty eyes. But now, the memory was different. It wasn't a mark of my failure. It was the catalyst for my freedom. The fire that had been meant to destroy me had instead forged me into something stronger, something that could withstand the heat. I realized that my family's love had always been conditional. It was contingent on my staying small, on my playing my designated role as the supporting character in Liam's story. The moment I tried to write my own script, I became a threat. Their betrayal wasn't a sudden break. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of quiet dismissals and skewed priorities. They hadn't chosen Liam over me in that one moment. They had been choosing him my entire life. The sabotage was just the first time the choice had been made so public, so undeniable, that even I could no longer ignore it. Healing, I learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding the wound so completely that it no longer has power over you. Months later, Aunt Carol and I found a small, perfect commercial kitchen space for rent in a trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood. It was half the size of the gallery I'd rented for my first launch, but it felt 100 times bigger. We painted the walls a warm, inviting sage green. We bought second-hand equipment, polishing the stainless steel until it shone. We named our new venture Phoenix Pastries. It felt right. We started small, selling at local farmers' markets on weekends. I went back to my original recipe for the chrono croissant. The real one. The one that tasted like a memory. The first time a customer took a bite, and their eyes lit up with that look of pure, unadulterated delight I had been so desperate to see on Mr. Harrison's face, I nearly cried. It was a feeling more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. It was validation, earned and pure. Our reputation grew through word of mouth. People were drawn not just to the quality of the pastries, but to the story behind them. I never told it explicitly, but people can sense authenticity. They knew this food was made with something more than just flour and butter. It was made with resilience. Jasper, my loyal cat, became our unofficial mascot. I posted pictures of him supervising the baking process on our Instagram, and our followers adored him. He was a symbol of our quiet, steady survival. I learned to find family in the places I least expected it. In my aunt, who had always been my true North Star. In the community of fellow artisans and small business owners who supported each other fiercely. In the loyalty of my customers, who showed up week after week. My definition of family changed. It was no longer about blood or obligation. It was about who showed up for you when the fire was raging, who handed you a bucket of water instead of a can of gasoline. One day, a letter arrived at the bakery. It was addressed to me. The return address was my parents' house. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from my mother. It was 4 pages long, written in her elegant slanting script. It was a masterpiece of non-apology. She wrote of her deep regret for the unfortunate situation. She spoke of the immense pressure and her misguided attempts to keep the family together. She said she hoped one day I could find it in my heart to understand. The word sorry was conspicuously absent. She wasn't sorry for what they did. She was sorry for how it turned out. She was sorry they got caught. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in a drawer with my unpaid invoices. It was just another bill I had no intention of paying. The truth is, some betrayals are too deep to be mended. Some foundations, once cracked, can never be made whole again. And that's okay. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. Sometimes healing is the quiet, deliberate act of building a new house on a different plot of land. A house with stronger walls and windows that let in the sun. So if you are out there, feeling invisible in your own family, if you've been made to feel that your dreams are too big or too small or simply inconvenient, please hear me. You are not the problem. Your light is not something to be dimmed so that others can feel brighter. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders will be your biggest obstacles. And the most courageous thing you can do is to walk away from the game they want you to play and start your own. Build your own oven. Create your own alchemy. Let them watch from a distance as you rise from the ashes they so generously provided. You are the author of your own story. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen.